Now,
Oh, we're live.
We're live. Good afternoon, everyone.
We are not wasting a minute because these sessions are jam-packed and we want everyone to have their full hour.
Especially
Jenny,
with you, Michael Pugliese,
yes.
rock star of the entire skincare industry.
oh, thank you. You flatter.
So I'm not going to waste any time. I think everyone knows who they're here for. It's 3 o'clock. It's Monday. We are ready to get rolling. Barry's got a few housekeeping notes that we want to mention before we start.
Real fast and furious. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'm turning my cell phone off because I had it on earlier. Not use the Q&A box, not the chat box, please. That helps us keep track of the questions. Secondly, if you want to follow along on Instagram, we are Lipgloss_Aftershave, and it is Circadia. Are they USA, Jen?
Circadia Skin.
Circadia Skin on their Instagram, and it's hashtag LAFest. Take screenshots, put them in your Instagram story, tag both of us. We'll share like crazy. Other than that, Michael, we're gonna mute and turn our screens off. You can share your screen, and you are the rock star. You are, for the next hour, it's all you.
Okay, very good. So I can't see myself, but I can see the screen. As long as everybody else can see, I think we're ready to get started.
Michael, did you hit share screen? I don't see your screen quite yet.
Okay, let me try that. Share screen. Share.
There we go.
There we go.
And then just make it big, and you're rocking and rolling.
All right, how do I, there, like that? Is it big?
I keep muting myself. I'm sorry. Yes, it's big.
It's big. Okay, good. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining me. My name is Michael Pugliese. I'm the owner and CEO of Circadia. Today, we're going to be talking about pigmentation disorders, causes, and treatments. I want to thank Jenny and Barry from Lipgloss and Aftershave for organizing this event. I've been tuning in and watching some of the other presenters, and yesterday and today, just fabulous material, just really great content. I think it's just an incredible way for the industry to stay connected. We need it now more than ever with the situation here that's going on in the country with COVID. Obviously, so many businesses have been affected. The nation has been affected. The economy has been affected. So anything that we can do to make sure that we stay connected, I think is going to be incredibly important. So I'm very happy to be participating and be part of this. So I'm going to share with you, again, some information on pigmentation and what we can do to treat. We're going to be talking about some treatment options and some home care options as well that we can help get to some of your clients, and also some treatment options that we can start when things get back to normal, that we can hopefully be performing as well. But let's talk a little bit about pigmentation, how it happens, and when things start to go awry. So in order to fully understand and appreciate pigmentation and how it happens, and when we start to see the issues with pigmentation, that we do hyper and hypopigmentation, we really have to have an understanding and appreciation for the melanocyte, and that's the cell that's responsible for producing all the pigmentation in the skin. And if you look at the slide that we have here, the presentation, the little M that we have in the arrows, those are pointing to the melanocytes. These, of course, are the cells that are responsible for producing all the photoprotection in the skin, for helping to protect against ultraviolet radiation, ultraviolet damage. And there's a very specific number that we have, and we'll talk about exactly how many there are. But taking a look at this slide, I want to really call your attention to where they are. If you look at where they actually are just in the basal layer, and they're there for a specific purpose. And you can tell that this is a younger skin because of that kind of peak and valley look, right? Those ups and downs that you see in that basal layer separating the epidermis and the dermal tissue. And this particular slide is stained. That's allowing us to count these melanocytes. They have a clear cytoplasm. But again, I'm going to talk about how the numbers and the distribution are affected. The story of the melanocyte is an extremely interesting story. It actually starts during fetal development in a part of the brain called the neural crest, and then it migrates into the areas of the skin, again, where it's there for photoprotection or protecting from ultraviolet radiation. And it means it's a migratory cell, and that's good in a way because that's how it gets to where it's supposed to be. It's also what makes it one of the most fastest moving cancerous cells. When it metastasizes and becomes cancerous, it's one of the most deadly cancers that we know of, and it's because it's not recognized as moving. So again, that's one of the reasons why we see the problems with melanoma the way that we do, is because it moves so quickly, and it's the nature of that cell in particular. So these are some of the things that we know about the melanocytes and pigmentation and the whole system. Pigmentation is one of the things that we see the most as estheticians. For many of us, it becomes a passion of how and why and how we treat pigmentation. It's something that I started looking at and following early on. I started looking at some of the educators that were focusing on that. I started to talk about this during a presentation that we did last week for some of the viewers that probably are tuning in. I didn't get a chance to show it, but this is actually a book that I got from my grandfather back in 2009. He actually did the inscription here. This is one of his books. And before that, he loaned it to me and it said, "This book is not an orphan, it has a home." But then he finally gifted it to me. But it's the pigmentary system. And as you can see, it's a massive textbook. And it is a little bit older, but I can't tell you how much information I've learned about pigmentation from that text and then the ongoing research. So certainly something that we as estheticians continue to follow and keep up with. I want to talk a little bit about skin color at first. When we look at skin color is actually a composite. It's actually a collection of different colors that we see together. Hemoglobin is one of the primary pigments that we see. It can be oxygenated or non-oxygenated. When it's oxygenated, it's traveling through the blood, delivering oxygen to the cells for the purposes of cellular respiration and ATP production. When it has non-oxygenated, it's blue in color, and that means it's carrying away carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular respiration. It's actually taking it back to the heart and the lungs for it to be recirculated back once again so it can carry oxygen again for the same purpose. So when you look at someone who has kind of a dull or grayish hue to their skin, oftentimes you'll see that. We see this in certain clientele, in particular smokers, because they're taking in a lot more carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide into the system. They'll have a little bit more of a grayish or hueish color to the skin. Carotenoids are another thing that can actually cause a yellowish or an orangish pigment in the skin. If you have people that are taking a lot of carrot juice in, these beta carotenes, if they're eating a lot of squash or pumpkin in their diet, this can actually affect the color of the skin. It actually gives a little bit of an SPF factor, very, very small, sometimes almost immeasurable. Tomatoes as well can have carotenoids in them, but they can actually give the skin a little bit of a yellowish or an orange pigment. When we talk about melanin, most of the time we're talking about eumelanin or brownish or blackish pigment, and I'm going to discuss that in a little bit more detail here shortly. But these four pigments primarily come up with the composite that we look at when we see someone's skin color or skin tone. When we actually see the skin color, truly what we're looking at is reflected light, because all those pigments that I just discussed, they absorb different wavelengths of white light. When you look at white light, when it comes from artificial light from inside or natural light that's coming from ultraviolet radiation, it holds all colors of the rainbow. So when you're looking at that light and it's shining into the skin, certain wavelengths of that light are being absorbed by those pigments that I just mentioned. The rest is being reflected back, and that's what we pick up in the eye as an individual's skin color. So what you're actually seeing, especially if you turn off all the lights, there is no skin color, but what you're seeing when the lights are on is actually reflected light. Again, back to the idea of the melanocyte. Again, it truly is a fascinating story when we start to talk about the melanocyte and what it is and what it does, where it comes from, what it's capable of. It's considered to be a dendritic cell. So again, somewhat migratory in nature, but it has these little finger-like projections called dendrites. And this is important to understand because these are the channels by which the pigment ultimately becomes deposited into other cells. And you can use this analogy, I oftentimes do this, is that the melanocyte is the factory. It's the cell that's responsible for producing pigment in the skin. But when we see it, and when it's utilized by the skin for protection, it's not in the melanocyte per se. It's actually in the rest of the cells that are surrounding it. It's in the epidermal keratinocytes that it's utilized, right? So we have the basal layer, we have the spiny layer, we have the granular layer, and the stratum corneum. So in the basal layer is where the melanocytes reside, or just beneath. That's where the melanocytes are making the pigment, but it's in the cells above, the spiny layer, and particularly the granular layer, where those melanocytes are, through the dendrites, depositing the pigment. Right? And the basal layer is constantly dividing, so those cells are moving up to the surface on their journey. The melanocyte, in comparison to the rest of the cells in the epidermis, they're stationary, right? They're staying there for upwards of almost 10 years, which with respect to the rest of the cells in the epidermis is a very, very long time. If you think about the lifespan of an epidermal keratinocyte, it's at its absolute worst, usually going to be about 40 or 45 days. Young adults and teenagers, it's 10 days sometimes. But the lifespan of the melanocyte is 10 days. It just stays there and keeps making pigment and pigment and pigment. Now, depending on the individual or the life stage of the life of that individual, that's going to be maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less. But that's the function of that melanocyte. It's supposed to stay there for a long period of time. And it's the factory that makes the cell. The keratinocytes are the trucks that are delivering it to its final destination, which is the surface of the skin. And then they ultimately slough off as epidermal keratinocytes. When we talk about the number of melanocytes, and this is a very important slide, it's a big takeaway. We all have the same number of melanocytes. Again, that's the number of cells that make pigment. We all have the same. So whether you're a Fitzpatrick 1 or a Fitzpatrick 6, we're all containing the same number of cells that make pigment. Something very different determines skin color. And for every one melanocyte, generally we have about 36 keratinocytes. So one cell is responsible for producing pigment for 36 other cells. That may sound like a very specific number, and it is, right? So don't let anyone tell you that anything other than that configuration is true. So it can range upwards to 40, but it is generally about one melanocyte for every 36 keratinocytes, and we call that a melanocyte unit or an MU, and there's about 2,000 of these melanocyte units per square millimeter of the face. So we know that the melanocyte makes the melanin, but how is it actually made? All melanin begins as tyrosine. So tyrosine is an amino acid. It's considered to be one of 20 of the standard amino acids. And you can see amino acids like valine, alanine, lysine, proline. These are all building blocks of different proteins and other structures that are found in the epidermis and in the dermis. But tyrosine is the precursor to all melanin. It's through the conversion of different enzymes that it ultimately becomes melanin in the melanocyte, right? So I have this in a diagram. And if you're looking here at the blue arrows on the slide, tyrosine at the bottom left-hand corner of your slide, you'll see there that the enzyme tyrosinase converts it in two different parts of the pathway. This is called the dark pathway. And I actually took this slide directly from Dr. Puglisi's Advanced Professional Skincare Medical Edition text. You see the tyrosine through the enzyme tyrosinase is converted to something called dopa-2. And then tyrosinase again converts dopa-2 into something called dopaquinone 3, and then ultimately into melanin. So I'm sure have all heard the term tyrosinase inhibitor, right? Vitamin C, hydroquinone, kojic acid, licorice extract. Those are all a group of skin lighteners called tyrosinase inhibitors. So what they're doing is they're blocking either the conversion of tyrosine into dopa-2 or dopa-2 into dopaquinone 3. Some will do it better than others, right? We can focus on one portion of that pathway. Some will block both portions of the pathway. But if you are using a tyrosinase inhibitor, you are blocking the production of melanin enzymatically. There's another part of this pathway that is called the light pathway, which produces another form of melanin. This one is the dark pathway. It produces eumelanin, which is the brownish or black pigment, but there's another one called pheomelanin. When we talk about types of pigment, we break them down into two separate categories. We have, in general, what's called constitutive pigmentation and facultative pigmentation. Constitutive pigment is your genetic pigment. So this comes from your genetic makeup. If you're a Fitzpatrick 1, your parents are probably Fitzpatrick 1s. If you're a Fitzpatrick 6, your parents are probably Fitzpatrick 6. If you have a Fitzpatrick 1 parent, a Fitzpatrick 6, you're probably somewhere in the middle. Facultative pigment comes from induced sources, and there's no shortage of induced sources. Ultraviolet exposure is a big one. Ultraviolet radiation, we call them sunspots. Hormones, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation that can come from acne, from aggressive procedures like peels done improperly, laser, aggressive picking at different lesions. There's a number of different sources that can come from, that can produce post-inflammatory pigment, but those are considered to be facultative. We break the different types of melanin or different colors of melanin again into eumelanin or pheomelanin. So again, the eumelanin is primarily what we see in most Fitzpatrick types, but pheomelanin can also be produced in lighter Fitzpatrick types, usually 1s and 2s, and that is a reddish or yellowish pigment. Oftentimes, if you're dealing with a Fitzpatrick 1 or 2, you'll see their post-inflammatory, in particular acne lesions, start to show up as these red or yellowish spots, right? And that is still post-inflammatory hyperpigment. We call them macules oftentimes, but it's hyperpigmentation, and they're producing it. It's red, oftentimes mostly red or yellowish pigment. Okay, so to summarize all that, I know it's a lot of information coming at you quickly. If you're, and I know we have a lot of different levels of education here that are joining us today. Some of you have been in the industry for 20 years or more. Some of you are brand new to the industry. Many of you may actually even be students. So no matter where you are in your industry, in the industry and your level of education, this is good, relevant information. Again, not just because you need to have it, but because so many of the conditions that we work with in aesthetics or professional skincare are tied to pigmentation disorders. So just to kind of summarize all this, the amino acid tyrosine, the melanocyte, takes the amino acid tyrosine, converts it through enzymes into different compounds, and ultimately into melanin. But once it's made in the melanocyte, it has to be converted and then transferred into the keratinocyte. So how does that happen? It becomes polymerized and then packed into little granules called melanosomes. And this is important. So we have melanocytes, which are the cells. The melanosomes are the pigment granules that end up in the keratinocytes. Again, the cells that are moving towards the surface of the skin. So the melanocytes are making it. The melanosomes are the cargo that end up in the keratinocytes on their journey to the surface. And again, it's the cargo, it's the melanosomes that are going to get around the DNA, right? They're there essentially to protect the nucleus of the keratinocytes as they're moving towards the surface. And here's an image that shows a lot of this whole process. So you can see, if you look here, the melanocyte is the blue cell. You see the little pigment granules. They're moving up the dendrites. Again, the dendrites are those little finger-like projections. And you can see the transition of those pigments. There's one slide here. You see the phagocytosis is the word. But those pigment granules, those melanosomes, move up to the tip of the dendrites. And then those keratinocytes are literally eating, here, I'll use my Pac-Man. They're literally eating those melanosomes right off the tip of the dendrites and pulling them in. And I say Pac-Man, and I use the term eating because that's what phagocytosis means. Phago means to eat, cytosis means cell process. So those cells are literally pulling and eating those little melanosomes in on their journey towards the surface, right? And to kind of help pull all that together, there's your spelling on phagocytosis, and I put the little Pac-Man down there in the image just to kind of pull all that in for you together. This is a great slide. I actually pulled this from one of our ingredient suppliers because it really helps to show melanogenesis as a whole, the whole process together. And they reference ultraviolet radiation, sunlight, and another hormone that we'll discuss here in just a little bit, alpha MSH. I just want to keep an eye on my time. Alpha MSH, which is melanin stimulating hormone. So that triggers a lot of pigment production and is part of the pathway for quite a bit of it. It ultimately is triggered by the keratinocytes. So when you get a sunburn, when you get a sun exposure, those hormones, those cell messengers will produce a pathway, a message to the pathway that ultimately gets onto the melanocyte. So let's say, for example, that UV light hits those epidermal cells at the surface. They then send a message down to the melanocyte that says, hey, we're under attack, our DNA is being damaged, make some melanin and get it up here to us as quickly as possible. And then that incites that entire process that we just discussed. So melanogenesis, more often than not, will be triggered by ultraviolet exposure, but those receptors have to receive that message, right? So that message has to come from an outside source. So that gets down here, and all those things that we just discussed, you can really have you have a really good visual here that's showing this whole thing taking place. I put this slide in here oftentimes because it's a really good visual. We as estheticians see so frequently slides like this that are static images, right? It's a shot of the cell or a skin section. The skin is not a static image. It's constantly in motion. It's in perpetual motion. Where your cells are when you fall asleep at night are certainly not where they are when you wake up in the morning. And everything that makes this a living, viable cell, from the nucleus to the mitochondria organelles that make lipids and proteins, endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, everything that makes this functional is being pushed out as soon as it divides in the basal layer. What's interesting is that what's being put into it is the melanin. So by the time it reaches the surface here, you can see the fourth layer up rather, the granular layer, you can see that darkening, that's the melanin. So when it starts to corneify and flatten out and really primarily becomes protein, all those organelles are being pushed out and become part of the extracellular matrix. At the surface, again, is where we see a lot of that melanin coming into play and being used for photoprotection. So that's why oftentimes you'll utilize either a peel, sometimes at home care, you know, you'll have a cleanser, whether it's glycolic acid or lactic acid or now mandelic acid, which is, you know, the superhero of the industry right now for treating pigmentation. You'll see an immediate improvement in pigmentation. Why? Because it's getting rid of what's at the surface, right? What's housed at the surface there is being removed, and you're seeing a lightening effect almost instantly. Now, regular application of some of those things like mandelic and lactic in particular, they're going to slow the progression of pigment production, right? So you've really got to do both. You've got to get rid of what's at the surface oftentimes, but you've really got to slow down the amount of pigment that the melanocyte is producing. If you do both of those things successfully, you're going to see a reduction in the amount of pigment in most individuals and most of your clients. Now, some ingredients are going to work better than others. Some clients are going to have a more stubborn case of pigment, and we'll talk about what to do with that and how you can recognize that if you're having those challenges. Okay, probably the most important slide in the entire presentation is why skin color differs, and this is the big one here. Skin color differs because of the size and number of melanosomes in the keratinocytes, in the cell, right? So as the melanocytes making them, it's the size and number of those melanosomes. A dark skin type is going to have almost 200 of them, and they're going to be very big. A lighter skin type is going to have as few as 20 per cell, and they're going to be very small. So again, go back to, we'll take a step back. The melanocytes making the pigment, and I'm pointing at my own screen like you can see it. The blue cell is going to be making the pigment. The pink cells around them. In a dark skin type, those pink cells are going to have 200 of those melanosomes, and they're going to be big. In a light skin type, there's going to be 20 of those melanosomes, and they're going to be small, right? So that's truly what makes skin color different. And again, if you're in between Fitzpatrick 1 and 6, you're going to have some variation of those numbers in between 20 and up to 200. Now, there's another factor that isn't really well understood yet. There's some research being done, and a lot of people are publishing some data on this. I've been talking about it for a few years now, but it isn't really well understood as to exactly why this is. And this is the concept of tyrosinase positive and tyrosinase negative melanosomes. What that means, let's say, for example, we have an individual that has 200 melanosomes in a cell. 100 of those could have pigment. 100 of those can be clear, right? They could have no pigment whatsoever. This is typical in certain Asian skin types, certain Latin skin types. Relatively new observation to the industry, but they don't know exactly why. And it's certainly determined by genetics, but this is one of the reasons why not all pigment treatments are one size fits all. You can have success with some individuals and not a great result. You can put them on the exact same home care regimen, and not everybody's going to get the same results. So this is why your results may be varying sometimes from client to client, is because not everybody's genetic pigmentation is going to be the same. So I hope that doesn't confuse you. Like I said, it's a relatively new understanding or topic to be understood, but you can hop online, do a little bit of research. I always recommend people to go to Google Scholar. That more than anything is a really good resource because it pulls from a collection of research papers and journals that have been published. Some of them you have to pay for, some of them are free. But it gives a good understanding as to what the experts are saying about these new subjects and new topics. And certainly a subject as broad as pigmentation needs to be dived into a little bit more. You got to delve into it regularly because there's always new information coming out. The Fitzpatrick scale, of course, goes from 1 to 6. Again, for those of you that are relatively new to the industry, the Fitzpatrick 1 is as light of a skin as you can find. Very fair skin, oftentimes red hair. Fitzpatrick 6, very dark skin, typically as dark as you can find, and dark hair as well. And we're all supposed to fit somehow into this category. The only issue that you find with the Fitzpatrick skin typing is, even though it takes ethnicity into account, we're all supposed to be categorized here into one another. So it doesn't take into account the fact that you can have somebody who is of African-American descent who's showing as a Fitzpatrick 2, who's going to respond the same way as if they were a Fitzpatrick 6 if you apply a very aggressive chemical exfoliant. So you really have to take those type of things into account when it comes to your treatment options. We'll talk about pre-treating when it comes to aggressive treatments, especially chemical peels, things like laser. You're always going to be better off if you pre-treat with a series of good skin lighteners. And these are things that are going to condition the melanocyte to produce less pigment from the surface itself, right? The whole idea of using skin lighteners is not just to get rid of the pigment that's there. It will suppress melanocyte activity and keep it from being as responsive to an aggressive treatment. Right? It'll keep it from producing pigment from the treatment itself. And that is extremely important, especially if we're dealing with darker Fitzpatrick's types and if we're working on an aggressive or persistent case of hyperpigmentation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to some of the ingredients. Okay, again, a little check-in summary, and I know there's going to be some questions. We're going to leave about 15 minutes to the end. Jenny, if you can, just let me know. I think we have a full hour for the presentation, then we have a 15-minute Q&A at the end. Just let me know if that's not the case.
Michael, we actually discovered that we can't do the overage. So you've got about 15 minutes and then you've got a 15-minute window for Q&A. So I also want to let the audience know that if you've got questions, Caitlin from Circadia is moderating the Q&A box. You can start sending your questions in now. I know everyone's been used to saving them for the end, but start sending the questions in now, and then Michael can answer anything verbally for the last 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so the melanin, again, it's polymerized and packed into melanosomes. The melanosomes are transferred into the keratinocytes through the dendrites, right? Those little finger-like projections. Skin color is determined by size and number of melanosomes, right? The tyrosinase positive and negative melanosomes are definitely a factor, but it is not the number of melanocytes. I've heard it in high-level lectures in the skincare industry, and I think I've sat there and bit my tongue and said, this is a disservice because this is not accurate information. So make sure, if anyone ever tells you that you know that that's not accurate. Okay, common triggers. Pregnancy, of course, are big ones. We all talk about the pregnancy mask, menopause, birth control in general. Even some of the ones that are associated with low-dose hormones are notorious for creating hyperpigmentation. Certain medications and illness, internal inflammation and stress are also triggers. These all kind of tie in together. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to discuss this, but there's a hormone called pro-opioid melanocortin, and it's tied to alpha MSH, melanin stimulating hormone, and a number of others, cortisol. So some of you may notice that your clients are, if they are dealing with pigmentation issues, possibly they've gained a significant amount of weight. This could be chronic stress that they're dealing with as well. So something to certainly keep an eye on, and we're talking about chronic stress. They sometimes come in a cascade, a hormonal cascade together. So something that's interesting that we've seen, that I've seen with some clients of ours. Sun exposure, of course, heat and inflammation in general. They're finding that more and more, especially in darker Fitzpatrick types that just specifically heat, can be a trigger of creating hyperpigmentation. And that's again, relatively new information. And there's more and more ingredient technology that's being developed as a safety net to help to control inflammation, and the heat. Cooling agents seem to be the most effective right now. Treatment options, as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So make sure you're wearing an SPF. We can debate all day long which is the best out there, but as long as you're getting full broad spectrum protection, it should say on the package a minimum of an SPF of 30. And it says broad spectrum. That means that you're getting protection from UVA and UVA 1 and 2, and of course UVB, which is, they're both extremely important. Tyrosinase inhibitors, that's the big category as far as what we focus on. Hydroquinone is probably the most well-known, but there are some safety issues with that. We'll cover that here in just a few moments, but there's other categories of skin lighteners that we'll get to. Exfoliation, of course, is important, but exfoliating properly, make sure we're not over-exfoliating to the point where we're creating inflammation or too much inflammation that can actually trigger more melanin production, which is actually not that hard to do, so we've got to be very cautious there. And inhibiting inflammation using anti-inflammatories, there's a couple of ingredients that will pull double duty. Niacinamide is one that is fantastic. Not only is it an anti-inflammatory, but it's a melanosome transfer inhibitor. It actually stops the pigment granules from getting into the keratinocyte. So it does both. And there's a lot of ingredients that will do more than one thing, and that's probably the best example in the industry. Hydroquinone, it's still considered to be one of the standard ingredients in the industry at 2%. It's considered safe, but many of the products on the market go as high as 4, 8%, even higher. You can get it from a compounding pharmacy at even significantly higher concentrations than that. The biggest issue with hydroquinone is that it also creates inflammation as it's working. On top of that, for darker Fitzpatrick types, long-term use, and anything over 9 months is considered long-term use. You should be staggering it if you're using it at all. You can develop something called acrenosis. Acrenosis is a dermal pigmentation where the melanocytes will actually start to push the pigment. Instead of into the epidermis, the pigment actually it pushes down into the dermal tissue. So even at its absolute worst, in the epidermis, it's turning over once every 45 days, but the dermal tissue, there's almost no turnover there, so it gets stuck. And really, laser is the only thing that will get it out, and the clients that end up getting this, darker Fitzpatrick types, 4, 5s, and 6s, they're not appropriate candidates for this type of laser anyway. So I'll show you an image of actually what it looks like. It almost starts like spotty microcomedones, but it becomes this raised purplish type of hyperpigmentation, and it's really a disaster. So you can look it up, acrenosis. I have a spelling for you, but it's O-C-H-R-O-N-O-S-I-S, direct use of hyperpigmentation, and it's a nightmare to deal with. So my recommendation is don't use it. There's a lot of other things out there that are much better. You get even those that aren't in danger of acrenosis, you have a rebound effect. So when you stop using it, it starts to come back and has a tendency to come back even worse. It's been on the list of things that most countries don't use anymore. And in the United States, for whatever reason, we're still allowed access to it. But I think the days are somewhat limited as far as accessibility goes. Azelaic acid is one that in most countries that don't allow hydroquinone, it's the primary alternative. It's used here in the United States for treating hyperpigmentation, but also rosacea. They use it quite a bit in Australia, in Asia, and other parts of the world. Fantastic skin lightener. You can get it from a lot of natural sources also. Kojic acid is another one that it can be used with hydroquinone, but also as an alternative, anywhere from 1 to 3%. The issue with kojic acid is that if you use it for a long term, especially for lighter Fitzpatrick types, you can develop a sensitivity over 1%. And of course, that's where it's most effective at 1%. But less of an issue with that than there is with hydroquinone. So certainly a higher safety profile. But when we started working with it, started using it, we found that a lot of people developed sensitivity. So it's something that we kind of steered clear of, especially now that there's a lot more alternatives that seem to be more effective. Arbutin's an interesting one because it's a glycosylated form of hydroquinone. So there's no issue with the rebound effect. It has a much higher safety profile, works much better. It actually works very well in conjunction with niacinamide and some of the others that we're going to discuss. But it's a fantastic alternative. Black cohosh is one of the extracts that you'll see. Most extracts like licorice extract, paper mulberry, they are classified as tyrosinase inhibitors, whereas black cohosh is an alpha MSH inhibitor. It actually helps to bind up and block the hormone alpha MSH that triggers the melanocyte to produce pigment. So while it helps to inhibit pigmentation, it's a completely different mechanism than your traditional and standard skin lighteners. Glabridin is something that's interesting. It's the main component. It's the metabolite that's part of licorice extract. It can be isolated, but it's frightfully expensive, very hard to source. So it's really not sustainable to be able to get it and keep it in a product at a a high enough concentration, so most brands won't use it, and if they do, they're charging astronomical prices, or they're putting it in there at low concentrations where it's not going to work. Vitamin C in any stable form is going to have great skin lightening capacity. Ascorbic acid is the one that you see quite often in serums, but the issue with ascorbic acid is that it's relatively unstable. To get around that, there are many other forms. Magnesium ascorbyl phosphate is one that we like to use in our serum. It's our best-selling product. Very gentle, very tolerable. There's another form which is oil-soluble, which you now find in a lot of creams and lotions on the market. That's called tetrahexadecyl ascorbate, or BVOSC for short. That has an incredibly high skin lightening profile, even as low as 1%. We use it at 10% in one of our products, the Bright White Serum, and it makes a huge difference, again, especially blended with some of the other ingredients that we've talked about and that we'll be discussing here. Cherry extract, wheat germ extract, plum extract, these are all great, but you're going to find these blended with other ingredients because they just don't have the efficacy to stand alone by themselves. Niacinamide, as I mentioned, a melanosome transfer inhibitor, but also a skin lightener. Really, really powerful tool for treating post-inflammatory hyperpigment from acne. Whether it's active acne or whether it's acne that just the pigment that you're trying to get rid of from acne scarring, a very, very powerful tool. We use it in our daytime control, and we see some fantastic results. Mandelic acid you're going to find in leave-on preparations, whether it's serums, you're seeing that more and more frequently, great results. We use it in a cleanser with the Amandola milk cleanser alongside of lactic acid. It's in our Australian Superberry antioxidant mask. We have it in our most popular peel, which is the Mandelic Clear. It's a half Jesner with 9% mandelic acid. We get really, really incredible results for treating hyperpigmentation, even in the darker Fitzpatrick skin type. So I love mandelic acid. I remember full well, Dr. Fulton is well known for so many discoveries. I was able to befriend him many years ago. We were talking about acne in one of the webinars last week. And I referenced his book, Acne RX, and I even have the signature here, but I got to know him very well. He and I shared many conversations. He and his wife, Sarah, became good friends. We spent years and years on the trade show circuit together, and we had a lot of conversations. So a lot of what I know about acne, I learned from him. But I distinctly remember the day that he was at our office here in Pennsylvania, he and his wife, and my grandfather and he were talking about pigmentation and some great things to use. And my grandfather said, well, mandelic acid seems to be something that we should start looking into. And you know, Dr. Fulton said, let's do that. And, you know, mandelic acid then became something that Dr. Fulton really helped to pioneer. So something that we absolutely love using, but certainly he took it to the next level and started combining it with things like retinol propionate and some of the other actives like benzoyl peroxide to really get some incredible results. But mandelic acid, however you use it, is extremely effective for treating hyperpigmentation. Okay, other skin lightening agents, the beta white, which is an alpha MSH inhibiting peptide, actually inhibits something called MITF, which is a transcription factor associated with pigment. Really fascinating ingredient there. It's a much more preventative way of treating hyperpigmentation. Chromobrite is a next generation tyrosinase inhibitor. So it works very similar to the way the hydroquinone does without, again, the rebound effect. Phenylethyl resorcinol and undecylphenylalanine, these again are what are referred to now as the next generation tyrosinase inhibitors. And these are all made in the last maybe 15 years, probably even less, some of them, in an effort to kind of curb the negative side effects we were seeing from hydroquinone. And these are coming from a number of different ingredient suppliers. For those of you that aren't really familiar with Circadia or me or what is it we do here, we do all of our own manufacturing in-house. But before Circadia as a brand, this is a company my grandfather started in 2001. Long before that, he had a career as a formulary developer and also a contract manufacturer. So there's a lot of history here before Circadia was a company in research and development. So we had very close ties with ingredient suppliers and other manufacturers. So it allows us to really have close relationships with them and really understand exactly what's out there for ingredient technology. So you're looking at an incredible collection of different products and ingredients here, and most of them, Mark, come on in. Thank you. Just put them right here, thanks. for treating hyperpigmentation. I mentioned the BVOSC, niacinamide, many of the others, Tyrostat, which is Rumex, a Canadian extract, which has even higher potency of things like licorice, which is incredibly potent. I mentioned alpha MSH, and this is a really good visual. Again, this is from one of the suppliers. This is data that's coming directly from them, and you can see here on your left-hand side of the slide, the alpha MSH just underneath the sunlight here. That's normal hyperpigmentation. But if you look at the right-hand side, you see beta white, and this is coming from Lucas Meyer, the manufacturer. What beta white does is it actually gets on the receptors that trigger the production of melanin. They actually get on the receptors and help to bind the messaging that triggers melanin production, right? So when you're working with tyrosinase inhibitors, they stop the messaging after the message to make melanin has been received. But this is a much more preventative way of treating hyperpigmentation. So I basically laid out 3 different ways that you can inhibit or disrupt the pigment producing process. So whether it's tyrosinase inhibitors, which is the standard and we've been doing for a long time, binding the receptors, as I just mentioned here, or melanosome transfer inhibition, if you're using all of them together, you're going to get a much better result. Right? You're disrupting that pathway in 3 different portions. So your results are much better if you're doing it in different mechanisms. This is aquinosis. I wanted to make sure that we got to this slide before we start to take some questions in the next couple minutes here. But this is that dermal pigmentation that I mentioned that comes about from the direct use of hydroquinone. And you can see it just kind of looks like spotty microcomedones almost, but you see the raised purplish lesions that are starting to form here from that inflammatory process. But if you look at a histological punch biopsy of the skin underneath the surface, you see the difference between the basal layer, sorry, the epidermis and the dermis, and in the dermal tissue is where all the melanin has been pushed to. So that's where all the melanin is contained here, and that is certainly not where it's supposed to be. And that is a direct use, direct result of the overuse of hydroquinone. Now, is everyone going to get this from using hydroquinone? No, definitely not. But darker Fitzpatrick types are certainly more prone to it than anyone else. Real quickly, I'll just run through some of the products, treatment options that we have available. The Amandola Milk Cleanser, fantastic option. As I mentioned, it has both lactic and mandelic acid. It's a true milk cleanser, no foamer here. But if you do like a foaming cleanser, we have a manual exfoliant, which is the micro exfoliating honey cleanser. It's an organic beeswax bead, which is very helpful for getting rid of surface pigmentation without being too overly abrasive as a scrub. There's no pumice or crushed nutshells or anything. It's going to tear up the skin the way that some of those are. It's much more gentle. The Licorice and Bearberry Brightening Mist takes the step of a toner because of the nature of the surfactants in our products. There's no need for a toner, but this is a great application of a number of different brightening ingredients that we have available. And it really, really helps to impact the level of pigment that we're seeing in a lot of the clients. For very deep, dark hyperpigmented lesions, we recommend the Bright White Serum. Again, another power-packed formulation. The trans-resveratrol is something that's really interesting. Resveratrol is great. A lot of you know it and may take it as a supplement or use it in a professional treatment product, but it's hard to work with because it doesn't solubilize very well. This particular form comes to us from a supplier that it solubilizes very easily, but that in conjunction with this form of vitamin C that I mentioned earlier, tetrahexadecyl ascorbate, this makes for an incredible combo for Lightening. Just the 2 of these together are an incredible combo. They actually work very synergistically together. On top of that, we have the phenylethyl resorcinol, which is Simwhite, which is now one of the most widely used skin lightener in Asia. Right, this comes from a pine bark. It has incredible safety profile. It's not the same type of resorcinol that we see from in a Jesner peel. It's also the most widely used for intimate lightening currently. So a lot of people have asked the question, is this something I can use for intimate lightening? And the answer is yes. White Veil Brightener, again, some of the more standard ingredients that we've talked about in the niacinamide and alpha-arbutin, those are things that are technologies that have been used for quite some time. But we've also included things like the Sepi White, which we talked about, and the Beta White. So here you have something that's going to lighten overall tone of the skin. And also with the serum, you've got a great system with all the products together that are going to focus on deeper, darker, hyperpigmented lesions and lighten overall tone as well. 2 more slides and then we'll start to take some questions. The Mandelic Clear, as I mentioned, fantastic blend of ingredients. The mandelic acid is the real hero here, but it's a half Jesner. So a standard Jesner composition is 14% of lactic, salicylic, and resorcinol in an ethanol base. So we have to make it less aggressive, but added the 9% mandelic to make it very effective for treating pigment. So it's still a 30% accumulation of active ingredients, but really, really works well for treating pigment. The question I get a lot is, well, how do I apply this? We definitely have protocols for you, so we don't have time to go into it today, so we can talk to some of the viewers if they're interested. My customer service team is here. Many of them are actually working from home. We are still fulfilling orders as well, so we'll talk about that when we have some questions, but we have protocols available for those of you that are interested in getting your hands on them. We can partner this also. It's designed to be utilized as a system with the vitamin A Accelerator. It's a 2.5% vitamin A. So what this does is that with all peels, you're denaturing proteins at the surface of the skin. A little plug for our webinar next week. We're doing the 5 Ps of peeling here at Circadia. So if you're interested, make sure you sign up for that on our educational forum or go to info@circadia.com. But all peels are going to denature from the surface, but what the vitamin A does, it's a proliferator. So it pushes from the bottom up. So essentially what you're doing is you're getting rid of what's at the surface, and then you're getting that activity from the basal layer to push from the bottom up. So essentially you're getting a little bit of a dual peel action. So some people will even notice that the skin sloths and flakes, but they'll peel even more so a few days later from the vitamin A activity. The Australian Superberry antioxidant products mask is also a great product. That too has lactic and mandelic acid, very good for treating pigment, but we also use it for acne treatment. The vitamin C, as I mentioned, it's the magnesium ascorbyl phosphate, very, very effective. We use it, we recommend it for all skin types, no matter what they're treating. For everyone, great antioxidant protection, also great for treating hyperpigmentation. Any good SPF, we don't argue which one's better, which one's worse. If you're treating pigmentation, use a good SPF, and certainly we can provide more information for you if you're interested on the SPF. These are some of the results that we're able to get utilizing the Mandelic Clear and the home care products. Fantastic results. This is some of the results we got for treating hyperpigmentation. There was also a lot of vitamin A that was involved here. It was a short case study, but we got some incredible results. And this is using for treatment of acne, but also with acne and pigmentation, they clearly go hand in hand. So yeah, there's some incredible results to be had there. We use the oxygen system, but we also use the Australian Superberry mask with the mandelic. So mandelic acid, antimicrobial, and helps to treat hyperpigmentation. So incredible results to be had there with both of those. So with that, I think I am out of time, and that is by far the fastest pigmentation presentation I have ever given in my life.
Oh my God, it's remarkable. And you know what? I have to tell you, Michael, let me switch this view, that your team, Caitlin, just like blew through so many questions. So we're actually doing pretty well.
And I have to say that my team is already the best team in the industry. They are incredible. They are phenomenal. But through all this, since we got the first call that the New York show, and literally an hour after we had set the booth up, it was time for us to come and break it down. We knew we were in for something different, but my team has been absolutely incredible. We've stuck together. Some of them, unfortunately, we just like everybody in the world have had to take a little bit of a pause, a little bit of break. But we're all in this together. So it's a tough time for everybody out there, but my team has really been there to support me, to support the company. So we're doing everything we can to get through this as quickly as possible. So, it's just, I'm touched at how hard they've worked and how hard they are continuing to work as we're dealing with this as it comes at us.
Bear, do you want to dive into these questions? Because now they're going to start to flood in.
Okay, yeah, we've got a few minutes. Here we go. Let's see. Michael, question from Maria. Do you carry acne lines for dry skin, rosacea, aging, etc.? and how it aims at pigmentation.
Yeah, we do. So again, just a little if you're interested and we don't get time to any of the questions, info@circadia.com, 1-800-630-4710. Our customer service team is standing by. Even though a lot of them are going to be working from home, we have rollover. So if you call in here, they'll be able to get that. And our Circadia Educational Forum, it's a private closed group for estheticians only. So, feel free to get in there, ask questions. Our administrators are monitoring that. We have great products for treating acne, rosacea, hydrating products, a wealth of information. And if you ask questions on those, we can make sure that we get them to you. Obviously, way too much to specifically pinpoint which ones. It would take hours and hours to go over all those. But yes, we have some incredible treatment products for each and every one of those conditions.
Michael, Karen Fisher asks, can these peels and products be used by solo esties, not with a doctor? She's in Louisiana. That's pretty much a go, yeah?
Well, again, without having the regulations in front of me, I mean, some states it's a no. Every regulation is different. So they are a little funny. Many of them adhere to the same restrictions. Oftentimes it's a pH of 3 and a percentage of nothing over 30%. Other states, it's the wild, wild west. So you can do whatever you want. As long as you're properly trained, I feel like it's safe, but really it comes down to what is your insurance going to cover? So that really is the standard answer. Call your insurance company, see if they'll cover it, and that's the big thing. But some of them are physician only in some states because of the percentages and the pHs. And the one that comes to mind is the Jesner because it's the highest percentage composition, and also the lowest pH.
And Michael, there's no minimums on any of your orders right now, is that correct?
We're not doing any minimum orders. We're doing some incredible deals and specials. I mean, the idea here is to protect the aesthetic profession because we're the ones that are hit the hardest right now.
And Michael, just to clarify, it's circadiaeducation.com.
Our website is just circadia.com.
Okay.
But it's the Circadia Educational Forum. If they go to Facebook, Circadia Educational Forum, where it's a closed group that it's our international education community. So estheticians from all over the world who are using Circadia are in there asking questions, sharing their stories, sharing the before and afters, talking about their experience with the product.
All right, so that was for Abigail. Thank you for that question, Abigail. No question there. Yes, you are drop shipping. Do you want to talk to Bernadette about your drop shipping, Michael?
Yes, Bernadette. So one thing that we're doing, the program that we initiated is our staycation kits. So this is a free at-home facial kit. We're calling it the staycation kit. It's got our caviar, lime, and passion fruit, marshmallow whip hydrating mask, comes with instructions. We're shipping these directly to your clients if they make a retail purchase through you. So basically, if you've got an account with us or you want to set up an account with us, all you do is you purchase wholesale, and it's full wholesale price, right? We're not giving you a percentage. It's not a kickback program. It's full wholesale price. We will ship the product to them directly, bill them for the shipping charge, and they're getting the value of this kit, which is $50, actually priceless right now, and it's going directly to them. So we're drop shipping all orders, and we're waiving minimum fees for opening order packages. We don't have minimums on opening order packages anyway, but the idea is that we want to make sure that businesses stay as solvent as they possibly can for as long as this lasts, because the reality is we don't know how long this is going to last. And we want to make sure as many people stay in business as they possibly can throughout this difficult time that we're all dealing with.
Now, Michael, I know you mentioned you have a webinar coming up on your Circadia platform. They can go to circadia.com to the and look for that. But you're coming back here next week for another session. But you guys want to come up with something special, so you haven't decided that yet. We're going to get that onto the website, you guys. So take a look because Circadia is going to do something special and unique again next week. So come back for that. You have the dropship program, which, Michael, is unbelievable. You one of the first to do it, and your offer is the best. That $50 perk is helping so many people. I know that I've seen on social estheticians literally saying like they were able to like buy groceries for their families because they were able to sell Circadia products because of this. So it's like, it's genius, and it's the reason that Circadia has been so successful, because you think outside of the box and ahead of everybody else.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we're all doing the best that we possibly can do. So we just want to be there to support those who have supported us for all these years. And, you know, we're working on a couple of other things too, as much as we possibly can. And with that notion, a couple of other educators, I mean, places where we get our resources. This Wednesday, we're doing, I think it's this Wednesday, I think we're doing the 5 P's of peeling. So that's here. We're also doing another webinar with Dermoscope. We're doing our community facial tomorrow. So just hop on the educational forum, get in touch with us, go to our website and see all the amazing things that we're doing. The idea is that we're trying to help to keep people occupied as well, because I know a lot of you are at home just trying to figure out, hey, what do I do with all this time on my hands? Dr. Mark Lee's his textbook, a fantastic resource. Again, he's taught me so much. Also, he and Dr. Fulton have taught me so much about acne. Florence Barrett Hill, she's a fantastic educator. I know she's hosting some classes on Pastiche. I've had the opportunity to take some of her classes in person. I'd be remiss if I didn't plug my grandfather's textbooks, Physiology of the Skin and the Advanced Professional Skincare Medical Edition. And I have my book around here somewhere, but we'll plug that another time. It's the Outstanding Guide to Aesthetics. That's actually available on Amazon on your Kindle, and we have the hard copies here. I think they're $20 or something like that, that you can call. And there's a whole chapter in that one on pigmentation. So again, just some great resources while you're at home, catching up on reading. Just a few things to kind of take a look at.
Sounds great. All right, Michael. So what we'll do is we'll say thank you so much for being here. We'll see you again next week. You guys, if you have questions, it's info, I-N-F-O, @circadia.com. They'll get back to you with any questions we weren't able to answer. Find out about all those books, find out about upcoming webinars, get links to everything, open an account, start drop shipping to your clients and earning money. Thank you so much, Michael. Everybody have a great day.
Bye,
Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. Stay safe, stay healthy, be well.
Bye.
Bye now.